This is behind the screen, the humans who use our code. So what we're going to do in this talk is take a little break from the more technical stuff we've seen today and focus on sort of the end result of the things we build. We build products so people can use them, right? And sometimes we don't spend enough time thinking about our users and how they interact with our products and how what we do impacts them, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I am Adam McNeilly.
I'm Matt McKenna, and let's talk about Android. So to start off this talk, we're going to define a couple things for the purpose of this talk and how some apps are made for their intended users. First off, we're going to talk about consumer apps. This is that app type that is pretty much available to everyone. You can download this from the Play Store or any other app store you want, sideload this APK, whatever you want to do. It's an app that pretty much anyone has access to and can do whatever they want with. Next up is commercial tools. This is a bit more restricted. They are usually used in a place of work for a specific purpose to complete a task. And sometimes they're shipped with a specific device. Sometimes they are still downloadable from the store. Those lines can be blurred, but they're a more restricted use set for a specific case. Next up is internal solutions. For those, we have an example with the Netflix scheduling app. They build a Kotlin multi-platform solution to manage their sets and timings, to coordinate all of their filming and stuff like that. And then finally,
and there's also this idea of hidden Android, ways people interact with Android without ever realizing it. So this is an example of, I believe, a tonal screen, but things like tonal, Peloton, fast food order kiosks, plenty of opportunities for people to deal with Android out in the wild, but they don't realize it.
Yeah,
and even this one.
One great example of this is airline displays and entertainment systems. These typically run some version of Android. This one here, if you can see, is running Android Donut, I believe, because that's that yellow highlight that you get from that dialog, which is API 4. So it's still out there running on all these different devices, and people interact with it, and without maybe ever knowing that this is running Android and using operating systems that we build for every single day.
Right. And the reason we wanted to bring this up is because not only are there all these different ways that people come to find and interact with Android, but even within sort of the common things we think about, like all the different form factors, how we use our device across different form factors changes as well. So there's a whole myriad of ways people interact with Android that we need to think about when we're building things.
Yeah, so this could be like your watches, your tablets, your phones, your cars. Like Android is exploding into so many different areas, and we have the responsibility to address all of those for the users who want to use Android in that use case.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
And everyone uses their device in their own unique way as well. So sometimes it's not enough to just think about all of these different options that we have, but even within any particular one way of using Android, everyone uses it in a unique way. And it gets even more complicated than that, because not only do me and Matt use our device differently, but how one person might use their own device every day is going to change.
Yeah, and so the main thing that we all think of when we throw out a term like accessibility is usually a more permanent situation. So someone who is hard of seeing might stay that way. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes you have situations that do change. Not everything is going to be a static situation. So someone could be driving or break their arm or something and have to switch to one-handed use. And you might think, oh, it's okay to have an interaction where I have to tap a lower corner and a higher corner at the same time. But for these users, this isn't okay. So you have to address this sort of situation.
Yeah, and it's just, I really wanted to show this slide to bring up this like situational concept. Because again, I think sometimes we're biased to think about permanent disabilities and not these situational things. Like I, as a tester, might be able to have no problem touching different parts of the screen, but if I ever become a parent, for example, that's really going to come back to bite me. So just realizing that these issues impact everyone.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to care for your users. When you're developing and working on something at your job every day, you're in a very isolated environment. And so it's very important to be able to reach out and solicit some information from your users in some form. Maybe it's a user research team, maybe it's through surveys, or just you have a really good set of analytics that you use in your app to see how people are interacting with things. And connecting with your users is really important because otherwise you might go down a path that isn't ideal.
Right. So, and if we don't really connect with our users, if we build what we think they need, we run the risk of building really complicated software, things that do a lot that we have the right intentions for, but really fall short of a lot of our goals. And I don't think it should be like that. I think software should be straightforward.
Yeah, recently we read a story about an elderly woman who came into a computer shop to have her laptop be looked at, and there was a lot of bloatware and like user analytic tracking software on this device, and it was just slowing the device down. And it was a brand new laptop. She had spent probably upwards of $500 on it, and it was basically unusable. And the technician found essentially that the company that created the laptop had all of this infective, essential malware that they wanted on the device to be able to track what the user is doing at the cost of the user being upset with the software.
Right. And it speaks to this idea that sometimes we can be guilty of where the companies work for themselves and not for their users, right? And they create this problem. And so the way they were able to resolve this issue is the tech was able to basically open up this sort of Lenovo dashboard, see all of the software that was running, work with the customer to figure out what they didn't actually care about, turn it off, and it ran like it was brand new. And they obviously were happy in the end, but you shouldn't need to be a software engineer to use software. I think a lot of people in this room kind of understand that solution. We might think to do that ourselves, but people who are not software engineers, who are not super technologically proficient, they would never think that something is running in the background because they don't see it, right? Yeah. That's kind of something we take for granted as engineers who build background services, that we don't see them. So we know they're there, but how is anyone else going to know that?
Yeah, and the worst part of this interaction is this woman is coming in to get help from this person and is upset that they are having to take time away from this person's day because they think that they have done something wrong and they think that they are unable to solve this situation, and they feel that they should be empowered to do this, and ultimately they should, but there's a disconnect in that understanding and what is available, like Adam just mentioned. And that brings us to our next point of, users' guilt is our burden. We shouldn't create software that users feel bad about using. We should control these experiences for them in a way that promotes them to be successful.
Right. So another example of this, of sort of someone feeling guilty for having inability using software, was a great video I saw on TikTok recently. So this is the person trying to set up their Apple Watch. And what they're doing is they've got this prompt on the screen that says, position Apple Watch inside frame. And they're holding their Apple Watch down, trying to get it to connect. You may see in a second, there's a QR code on the watch here. Now, some of you are already chuckling, who understand this right away, and other people are also probably a bit confused because there's this black screen, and that's all you get. And this goes on for about a minute, but what's happening here is it's black screen because it's pointed at the table. This is actually a camera app that's open. You're supposed to pick up your phone and scan the QR code on the watch, with the camera. But I don't blame this person at all. They were following instructions. Their phone just happened to be sitting on the table. And so this is what I mean. This person feels silly. They've got a group of people filming them, making them feel silly, but they shouldn't have to. This is our fault as developers for building these things with unclear instructions. This is a burden we have to take on. Yeah.
So ultimately, this situation could have been prevented by probably just some simple text, by maybe point your camera at your Apple Watch instead of put your Apple Watch in the frame. It's ambiguous directions, which comes down to our solution. This was tested in isolation. Maybe someone can't really pick up their watch or phone. Maybe it's mounted on something and the camera is blocked. We don't know, and so we need to take advantage of what we can control to make this better for everyone.
Right. So we've kind of highlighted why we need to think about our users, consequences we can have if we don't do that, and we'll continue to look at that. But I think the rest of the talk we can look at more specific examples that we have control over and how we can better take care of our users. And one way is to be conscious of how we do that through app updates.
Yeah, so app updates are great, because without them, none of us would really have a job. We need to continue to improve our products and pushing out new software, hopefully to continue to improve the experience for everyone. But we have to do that in a calculated way, as we've talked about a little bit, but especially in certain situations with the commercial apps that we brought up earlier. So commercial considerations are going to be a little different than the consumer ones because there might be documentation and manuals that are hard copy, physical, that are distributed to employees on how to use specific software. And if we ship updates that change how UI looks, like you can see this UI is fairly dated for today, but it did exist at one point. It was up to date, but it has developed since then. This is probably no good anymore. Like no one's going to be able to follow these directions and do what they need to do today. An update to a commercial platform or a commercial situation can very severely impact those customers of yours.
Right. And this is not just specific to commercial apps, right? Like companies that have maybe formal processes, like Matt said, we can really disrupt their workflow, but this disruption through app updates applies to consumer apps as well. And I'm going to bring this up to a very probably relatable point for most people in this room, but have you ever tried to help your parents after they got a software update? And they're like, where did this button go? Where did that app go? And we've all been there, right? And it just speaks to that point, like we tend to have good intentions with app updates, but we can cause a lot of disruption by changing their day-to-day flow. If it was working, why did we change it? And I think I've seen even Android developers be upset about this. When the Android 12 system UI came out, everyone was complaining about how much it changed the settings drawer and things like that. And that's all valid. Like, sure, I think this looks nice, but it's all valid. It worked in Android 11. Why did we have to overhaul everything? And it's not always bad, but just being conscious of like asking that question.
Yeah, I think we're more tolerant to change because, like we were saying, you're a software engineer, you know how to navigate these situations, but not everyone is. Not everyone can. So these app updates have impacts, is what we're getting at. We have the ability to control how this is done and how we can introduce new functionality to our users. And that brings us up to our next topic, discovery. So there's a lot of ways to introduce new functionality or moved functionality in a lot of situations through some different means.
Right. And when we do that, we kind of want to think about this question like, what do we teach our users? So if I add something new to the product, like how do I teach that to my users? How do I help them find that? Or maybe there's functionality, we'll look at a couple examples. One example where I think it can be helpful to think about like teaching people is this idea of like the view pager. So this is a view pager on the screen. We're Android developers. Many of us have seen this. And there was a research study done once where they showed this to a bunch of people, and they said, go to Object 4. And overwhelmingly, all of the people who used this tapped on the heading at the top because they didn't know you could swipe this. And it's true. You're looking at a static image on the screen. There's nothing to indicate that this is a swipeable container. And this is where our bias as engineers comes in. We build this. We know that ViewPager has swipe functionality. It's in the documentation and everything. But to the end user, they don't know that. And sometimes we turn that off if we don't want the user to swipe through things. So we make it even more complicated.
Yeah, and so this tap mentality and familiar gesture probably comes from other software that they have used, most likely on a computer. So they think, I want to go to this page, I click on this item, and it should perform how I want, despite there being gestures that any power user or person who is familiar with Android would know about. And that brings us to our next slide, where the save button is another antiquated icon that comes from the history of computers because it looks like a floppy disk that used to be what we used for storage. But today, the new generation of computer users doesn't really ever see those in the wild. They don't know what that is. They call it the save icon, which is what it is, but they don't understand the history behind it.
Right. And I think there's similar to iconography, we also have other ways we interact with technology that, again, we may be very familiar to, but they aren't always taught. An example is this one.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite keyboards out there. I think that everyone is fairly familiar with these two keys. But again, the new generation of computing individuals doesn't necessarily know hotkeys on a keyboard. It's one of those things that we take for granted because it's what we use very frequently. But this new generation more so sees this as a long press and then you get the copy notification, or a long press and then the paste notification. So that they know of the functionality, but not that you can generally do this on any computer that you have access to.
Right. And specifically, just to highlight, we're referring to like soft keyboard functionality versus physical keyboards. And then one more example of sort of discoverability and making things difficult, doors. We've all been guilty of trying to push a pull door or pull a push door or finding a door that goes both ways, and it's just complicated, unnecessarily. It's a door. There's like 20 of them in my eyesight right now. But it speaks to this kind of bias we talked about earlier, sort of familiarity with environments. If you use a door every day, like your bedroom door, you never have to question which way it opens.
Yeah, and so there are apps that you have daily users, and they will know where and how to find things. And if you move something, they might be able to figure out where that thing is because they're just familiar with how the app works in general. But you also have to be aware of the new users who, the first time they go to an app, they might not know where it is. A door is a great analogy for that because someone who works at a building will intrinsically know, because of the frequency in which they're there, which way this door goes. But a new hire could come in and have to guess or know, or maybe this door slides. Who knows? Like, they're not going to have the same familiarity with the product that you have developing it. So you have to kind of take that into consideration when you are introducing new things or changing existing things.
Right. So we went over examples of how like unfamiliarity can cause problems for users. So let's go back to that idea. Well, if we need to help people use our product, how do we do that? And there's a couple like examples we want to look at. The first one is this idea of like a product showcase. This is something that you may have seen in apps before where you load it up for the first time and we show this like overlay telling you what to click on and what it does. And this has pros and cons, right? A pro is that it clearly walks you through the product. The con is no one ever looks at these. And in addition to that, it can be a really frustrating user experience because I downloaded an app for a reason. There's something I want to use about it. And when I open it and I get this, I cannot use the app for the reason I downloaded it. That is a frustrating user experience. And again, this isn't always bad, but generally you might wonder, is there a better way we could teach people? And one idea we liked of that was Twitter DMs. You want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so Twitter DMs are a good example of how to slowly introduce functionality to your users. This is kind of our both preferred way of doing this instead of that sort of product tour, because like Adam said, no one really reads them. We just click through to try to do or experiment with what we're trying to do. But Twitter DMs have the ability to add a reaction to a message. And when you click on the little heart with the plus icon there, it pops up with the reaction, so it lets you do what you're trying to do. But also at the top, it says you can add a reaction by double tapping a message. And it's not even in like highly contrasted text or anything. It's very subtle, but it's there. Right. And the greatest part is when you do this gesture, you don't see that message. They have essentially taught you already, and they don't need to show you again that you can double tap. It would be kind of counterintuitive to say, double tap on this when you've already double tapped on it. So it's a really subtle difference that they do, but it does improve the experience a little bit. Which brings us to the whole goal of to help without hindering. Don't get in the way of your users. There are plenty of ways that we as developers are asked to break up the app experience.
This DroidCon presentation is interrupted by Raid Shadow Legends, the most intrusive mobile gaming experience. That joke landed way better than it did in New York, so I'm glad. But as funny as that is, this leads to, in talking about hindering our users, one of the biggest ways we see that is through ad breaks, right? And sometimes that has to happen. Our companies need to make money so that we can keep the lights on and pay our salaries and things like that. So we can't always get rid of this, but it speaks to this idea of try to balance monetization with usability. And these things are always going to be at odds with each other in a little bit, but in some ways, but it's just try to be conscious of thinking about that. How many ads is too many ads? Or can you try to do both? Can you serve ads without interrupting the user experience? So one way I've seen that, so I work at Twitch, which has its fair share of annoying pre-roll and mid-roll ads, but something that we sometimes do as well is when something's playing, we'll just pop up an ad on the bottom. And what I really like about this is I can still see what I'm watching. right? It doesn't interrupt my user experience. This is the way they've tried to strike a balance. And I know people are still not going to love it. It gets in the way. But this is a kind of way to think about how we can strike that balance if we are able to achieve our monetization goals without hindering the user experience.
Yeah, and so sometimes we should disrupt our user flow, though. Sometimes it's important to, like we mentioned earlier, solicit information, care about our users by asking them what they want from us, how they're experiencing different app flows, processes, and what they're using. One case is like this. We see in this consumer app, YouTube, they are asking for information on comments. And it's not full screen, so there would be a video playing or able to be played above this, and so you'd be able to answer and listen and do what you want. It's not necessarily interrupting, but if you got a survey like this in a commercial app or your internal solution app, you could be trying to like process a checkout or scan a QR code or a barcode for something. And if a survey pops up in the middle of that, like that's going to be really frustrating for you because you're just trying to do your job. You don't want to have to think about rating your experience at this moment. So just be careful with how you get this information. It can be a little jarring to break the user flow, but sometimes it needs to be done.
Yeah, and an interesting thing to point out about this particular survey, to kind of segue into our next section, is there's 6 options here for the user to respond to. One of them is not applicable. Of the remaining 5, 4 of them are positive responses. You could say absolutely outstanding, extremely good, very good, good, and 1 not good. I feel like we're being coerced into sort of unauthentic feedback here, right? And so these manipulative surveys, which when you're paying attention to them, you kind of see them, unfortunately, very often, but these are a dark pattern. And so I think we're at a point in the talk where we can look at other dark patterns, things that we implement that, unlike what we talked about earlier, where there's a little bit of gray area about whether or not this is right or wrong, there's some things we should just not do. Here's one.
Yeah. Don't force portrait. It doesn't work in the slide deck. It shouldn't work on a phone. There are users that need to be able to show a device in landscape. It's really important to handle this for everyone. Like, yes, it can be complicated, but that problem is mostly solved by now, and this really isn't acceptable anymore.
Yeah. Another one that's unfortunately annoying is when you try to leave an app and you get this press back again to exit. I'm looking at you, TikTok.
Yeah, so the TikTok example is one that is fairly the worst at this, because not only does it show this toast that you have to tap again to exit, which is another gesture that is needed, which could be an accessibility concern in the first place, and disrupts user flow. They also show you a new TikTok, which is trying to retain you in the app, which is not very user-forward thinking, which, if we learn from the laptop case, can really significantly like play against people and how they're using the app, and it just really shows that they are doing this for their own gain.
Right. And it's, again, another example of just like hindering the user's workflow, right? Like, I want to do a thing, I want to leave the app, and you're not letting me. Another example we sometimes think of is like non-dismissible dialogues. So this was actually interesting. When we wrote this slide, I thought of times I've used an app that has like popped up information about something that I can't like click away or press back. I have to like acknowledge that I read whatever it said. You can tell my example is vague because I'm a user. I don't read, right? We realized after the fact that this is maybe a questionable thing, because if there's something like Amber Alert that is super duper important, maybe you shouldn't be able to easily dismiss that. But I do think like non-dismissible dark patterns or non-dismissible dialogues is a dark pattern that we should think of. Which leads to another question, like, should we ever force user behaviors?
Yeah, so there's multiple different types of users of an app. We mentioned earlier that everyone uses their devices a little differently, and sometimes maybe we do know how a user should use a product. We are designing these experiences. We have the control of creating these different flows, but maybe someone will want more customization than another person, or maybe someone wants the app to run all the time in the background and someone wants to protect their battery a little bit more. So we might need to surface some of this functionality and allow people to control it rather than making one decision for everyone.
Right. And this is where what we talked about earlier, these different Android environments do come into play. In like a commercial environment where I'm building something to be used for work, it may be possible that I want a very strict, streamlined experience, right? Because we don't want mistakes. Those can cost money, etc. But in a more like consumer app environment where millions of people are using my app and they all use it differently, then we might want to give them that customization that Matt talked about. And that's what we're going to talk about next is like one way to do that is like a settings screen. A lot of apps have a settings screen letting you choose how to customize the app. And really we just want to think about like, well, what should be included? So here's an example of the wallpaper app on Android 12 and up where you can customize the theme. But you can see like a lot of options here, like I have control over my phone background, I have control over the colors, whether or not I want dark theme. And there's no like magic bullet or silver bullet, whatever Hadi called it this morning, for like what does and doesn't belong here. But it's a good question to ask, like what functionality should users have control over?
Yeah, and this is a great example of everyone's going to do something different here. We can't pick and choose this level of customization. Just a quick fun fact, this screen is locked to portrait, so if anyone in the room can fix that, that'd be great. But a great example is the new themed icon support added in Android 13. So a lot of developers and companies have embraced this, but not everyone has so far, and they're creating this uniform experience on a user's home screen, which is ultimately what they own more so than an app experience, which I really enjoy. But since not everyone might want that sort of ununiformity. So there's an option here that's even labeled beta that you can enable these or disable them if you want to have the true non-themed experience.
And another important consideration you need to make when you build something like this, especially something you put in the settings screen, is this idea of opt-in versus opt-out. So when I'm adding themed icons, what is the default behavior? Should everyone running this version have themed icons until they turn it off? Or should it be off for everyone and they have to go manually opt into it? And I would say that the majority of times, people should have to manually opt into something. They should not be like forced to these behavior changes. This is really obvious when we talk about permissions, right? We don't automatically give the location permission and make people turn it off. But so it's just something to think about. Typically, we want to make our users opt into something, which is a little more difficult. We have to figure out how to surface to them that they can opt into things. But really, we don't want to change their experience automatically if we don't have to.
Yeah, and it brings us to this idea of designing an experience that just works versus allowing the user to make it work how they want to. And the settings screen maybe isn't the best example for this because everyone's going to want it how they want it to work. But like the commercial app or the internal solution, those are fairly rigid environments that you have control over to make it just work and work consistently versus add customization.
Right. So there's obviously a lot more we could have talked about. There's a lot more other user considerations to make. But hopefully this talk was kind of really eye-opening in ways people use our products that we don't think about, right? And so let's recap some of that, just like key points that I think everyone can really take away from this talk. And the first one is just ask questions. Don't just build things. This was advice I got as I was trying to move up the ranks in my career, where like I started as a junior and I just wanted to learn technology. So when someone came to me and they said, build this thing, I just said, okay. And I went off and did it, right? So if someone came to me and said, hey, build this dialogue, and you have to click this OK button to dismiss, I was just like, okay. But really, I should have been asking questions like, is that the right thing for my user? Is there any way this hinders the user interface or the user flow? All of these things. Like, as long as you're asking questions, and with a lot of what we talked about, anything I made sound bad, so I talked about product showcases, I said we try to avoid those, but I do think there are times when they're helpful. And I think as long as you stop to ask yourself, like, is this the right thing for me to build? You'll end up with much closer to a good product, right? We're not always going to get it perfect, but as long as we're asking questions and thinking about our user, we're going to get a lot closer to that goal.
Yeah, and one back. Not only like do we ask questions about should we do something, but we should also ask questions about how we are doing something, because like we saw in the iPhone video, like that user had it on the table, did not know. Like we should ask, like, how will our users be using this? How will this impact them? And that situation we mentioned could have been better handled with a different text copy. It would have been much easier for the user to know what to do. But that gets us to the point of we control the next 10 years of Android. And Android is the most used operating system around the world because it does target all of these different use cases, whether it's in exercise equipment or it's in your work or it's in your phone. It doesn't matter. Like, we are responsible for helping build up the next 10 years and making sure that even though users might not know that they are interacting with Android, we need to care for them just as much.
Yeah. I think I'm all set. Do you have anything else you want to say?
I think I'm good.
All right, cool. I guess we can move on to that's awkward.
Oh.
We're all set. Thank you so much.